A few years ago, a wilderness exploration group, similar to the Boy Scouts, but not quite as mainstream, was staying at a summer camp, not unlike one you've probably been to, for a week. They went to this camp every year, and this trip at first seemed to be like all the rest. This was a young scout named Billy's first ever trip with the group, and he was very excited. He had heard the tales told by the other scouts about the fun things they had done at this camp, and was very much looking forward to it. When they arrived at the campsite, everyone unpacked their personal gear from the truck, set up the cooking stations underneath a pavilion, and then they selected which Adirondack they wanted to sleep in. For those unaware, an Adirondack is sort of like a cabin with only 3 walls and a curtain as the entrance. Billy was given the Adirondack furthest from the rest of the camp, and he was sleeping in it alone. This may seem strange to you, but this campsite was in the middle of the camp, and so it seemed to be the most well protected. Also, there were less scouts going this year, and so the adults decided to let everyone have their own Adirondack. The first few days of camp weren't too strange. Billy saw some scratch marks on a tree, and something got into the trash cans in the campsite during the first night, but all of that seemed normal for being in the wilderness. However, on day 3, things began to get weird. One of the other scouts told Billy a creepy story the night before about a man who hides behind the curtains in an Adirondack to kidnap scouts while they sleep. Billy was freaked out, but he knew the story was most likely made up, and so he still rested well that night. However, the next morning he awoke to find his curtains open on his Adirondack. This really freaked him out, but everyone else laughed it off, saying they probably blew open in the wind or something. Later that day, Billy was in wood carving class, and he couldn't find his pocket knife. He searched the pavilion for it for a solid minute, until finally he went back to his wood carving station and received quite a shock. There was his knife, resting next to his piece of wood, which had this inscribed on it: "You aren't afraid of curtains, are you, Billy?" The kid who had told Billy the story of the man behind the curtain was in Billy's woodcarving class, so he assumed he had done it, but the kid denied it and said he hadn't seen anyone carving anything on the wood. Billy had a hard time sleeping that night. He kept staring at his curtains. However, after he had finally fallen asleep, he awoke the next morning to find them open again. Now he was really freaked out. For the entirety of the 5th day he was paranoid, constantly looking over his shoulder. 3 times he thought he saw something moving in the woods through windows with curtains on them, and another time, while he was on a hike with some other scouts, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. All the other scouts just said that he was paranoid because it was his first time on a camping trip, and that he would feel better soon. That night, he thought he saw glowing eyes staring at him from the woods, but they vanished the moment he blinked. The next day was actually pretty uneventful. Billy welcomed the change of pace, although he was still paranoid. The only creepy thing that happened was that another boy's curtains were torn off of his Adirondack, but this didn't faze Billy as much as the other things, as it had happened to someone else. That night, a furious thunderstorm kicked up. Everyone was huddled underneath the pavilion, waiting for the storm to die down just a little bit so they could get back to their Adirondacks. Billy hoped it wouldn't die down, and he could sleep in the pavilion with everyone around to comfort him. This hope was reinforced when he noticed that every other Adirondack's curtains were being blown about furiously by the wind, but his curtains seemed almost calm. His heart skipped a beat when he thought he saw a dark shape enter his Adirondack, but the other scouts told him it was the shadows from the rain playing tricks on his eyes. Finally, the storm died down, and everyone retreated to their Adirondacks. Billy hesitantly inched his way towards his, and almost couldn't bring himself to open the curtains. When he finally threw them open, There was nothing there. Billy sighed, closed his curtains, and fell asleep on his cot, hoping that everything had just been his mind playing tricks on him. He was awoken in the middle of the night by a loud crack of thunder. The storm had kicked back up again. He tried to fall back asleep, but for some reason he was not tired in the slightest. He stared at his curtains for about a minute, before a flash of lightning revealed the shadow of a creature with horns standing in front of them. Billy almost fell out of his cot in fear. He stared at the curtains fearfully for 2 more flashes of lightning, and the shadow was still there, unmoving. Billy slowly got out of his cot and silently crept towards his curtains, hoping the shadow was something harmless, like the other scouts building a scarecrow in front of them, just to make him more nervous, or give him a good scare when he woke up in the morning. When he got to the curtains, he couldn't bring himself to open them at first. His heart was pounding, and his legs were shaking violently. Finally, he worked up the courage to open the curtains. He felt the water from the heavy rains splashing him in the face, but he couldn't see anything, until another flash of lightning revealed a dark figure in front of him, with horns on its head and a twisted smile creeping across its face. Billy couldn't even scream. His vocal cords tightened, and all he could do was fumble backwards and crawl to the back of his Adirondack. He waited for about 30 seconds, but nothing happened. Had it been his imagination? Just when he thought he might still be safe, and that everything had just been some sick joke of his paranoia, his curtains parted, and a dark hand reached towards him. Billy was finally able to scream. The adult leaders and the other scouts rushed to Billy's Adirondack, but all they found were his things exactly as he had left them, and his curtains open and blowing in the wind. They searched for him all night, despite the rain, but they couldn't find him. They left early the next morning, and they never let a scout sleep alone again.